Hi guys! Are you exhausted by the mental contortions people go through to avoid candid discussions about Islam and terrorism? Prepare yourself, as Douglas Murray is about to take apart the people who refuse to admit the truth and reality to themselves.
On the one hand, you're saying, look, we don't want to cower to the terrorists, we don't want to be singing their agenda, and yet the first thing everybody uses is the word Islam. Well, listen, in this particular state, I was actually in Scotland Yard on this case, so I was there on the day. To qualify as an Islamist incident, it has to fit a certain criteria. And it was discussed earlier on, but no one actually mentioned why this was classed and why it was taken over by SO15 as an Islamic incident. Otherwise, it would have just been homicide that would have taken over this case. There are certain criteria. For instance, if he said the word Allahu Akbar, that would have been clearly an Islamist incident. If he had had a flag of ISIS, clearly it would have been Islamic. He didn't have any of those. He didn't say anything. He didn't leave a note. The only thing that makes this a counter-terrorism
he was a Muslim.
No, not even that. It was because he wasn't we don't know if he was a practicing Muslim, because he clearly wasn't a very good Muslim, was the
What does that mean? What does a very good Muslim mean?
Well, if he's into... He was taking cocaine, he was into, wife bashing, all those things. If he was a Muslim, he wouldn't be taking cocaine and having, drinking alcohol. But it was because he attacked... Let me just finish the point. The reason was because he attacked a political institution, the heart of government. That was one of the reasons, if you like, that qualified it. He's in terms of practicing, that's still coming out. We don't know whether...
Well, you've just said what you think. You've just given us your view, which is that it's nothing to do with Islam. And other people will have a view that it is. But I'm suggesting that as a society, we actually take the time to work out people's motives. But it's very clear that in your case, for instance, you wouldn't want it to be ascribed to an Islamic motive. Even if it was turned out that he had a copy of the Quran in the car, you would say it had nothing to do with Islam.
We would have accepted that.
There are people, let me finish the point, and there are people who would say it has something to do with Islam, even if it's very clear that it has nothing to do with Islam. But there are, in this whole thing, my simple point is that we should be looking at the motives, and at the moment there are parts of the anti-terrorism and counter-extremism strategy where the government is, and politicians are very worried about treading on it. And you saw it, as was mentioned earlier, in Theresa May's comments in the House this week, where she immediately ruled one aspect of this whole thing.
So when you speak about journalism and accuracy, of course, and we all want the truth. It's not just you,
I disagree
it's me.
that we all want the truth.
Okay, so let me tell you, for myself, and I can speak on behalf of perhaps 99% of the British Muslim public, that generally none of us know the motives behind people who carry out these acts. I myself am very much part of this society. I'm born and raised a Londoner. I'm an observant Muslim, and you don't see somebody like me carrying out these acts inspired by my faith. Therefore,
that doesn't mean that the people who do it
I'm not saying I'm not, and people are analysing scripture. It's not whether it's the Quran or the biblical scripture. You seem to be quite hung up on the fact that this is a Quranic scriptural point.
Scriptures are open to interpretation, and literally.
If they're not quoting scripture, why are we bringing scripture into this? If they're not quoting scripture,
because a lot of them quote the verses that say, "Find the infidels, root them out, and kill them."
I debate these.
Douglas wanted to come in. Douglas,
come on. This is a great example of it right here. Miss Andalusi thinks that none of the terrorists ever quote the Quran. Flat out wrong. Flat out wrong. Let me give you one example. You mentioned it earlier, the killers of Lee Rigby. Michael Adebolajo, on his body, when the police arrested him, he had a note in his pocket to his young daughter explaining why he did what he did. It's all on the public record. You can see the facsimile on the BBC's website, and he has footnotes throughout it of Quranic verses that he explains justify, in his view, his actions. Now, that's the beginning.
Let me give you the scripture.
My point
Everyone's talking about the
before the proselytization begins,
okay?
Let me just finish my point. That would seem to me to be, therefore, a very clear occasion, never mind the thousands of others we could list worldwide, a very clear occasion on this country when one of our soldiers was murdered on our streets, where clearly Scripture had something to do with it. So the problem that a lot of us have is we are willing to discuss the drugs bit, we're willing to discuss the foreign policy bit, we're willing to discuss all this. Why are you not willing to concede that there is a religious element? Sometimes.
Kaboom! Douglas Murray just delivered a powerful statement, calling out the outright refusal to recognise Islam's role in certain terrorist attacks. Notice how they tried to silence him instead of addressing his points. This really is so typical. This is what happens when you challenge the untouchable doctrine of political correctness. However, we can no longer afford to ignore this issue. We must have the courage to face it directly for the sake of both Muslims and non-Muslims. Please share this video and get these conversations out there so that we can have a more truthful, honest and safer world.